healing, dreaming, believing, manifesting, pivoting. Welcome to Pivot's Pulse Podcast.
Welcome to Pivot's Pulse Podcast. I'm Lynne Penleon, Executive Director of Pivot's Potential LLC, located in Maryland, Virginia, West Virginia, and New Mexico. And we're here today with Dr. Natalie Dyer to talk about post-materialistic science and what it means in your life and around your life today. Welcome, Natalie.
Thanks, Lynn. It's great to be here.
It's great to see you.
Me too.
We're going to be talking about the modalities that are within post-materialistic science. And this is a paradigm that we're bringing into Pivots because it is so essential for the entire human experience. As people may know, at Pivots, we have Reiki masters and energy healers to help us with those clients that we deal with that have trauma, because there are many physical symptoms that go along with trauma healing. So I wanted to talk a little bit first about Natalie's experience as a Reiki master. Natalie, can you talk a little bit about your background and the research that you've done in post-materialistic science?
Sure, yeah. I guess, my background. So, I've always been interested in seeking truth. I'm not going to spend too much time on that, but always interested in truth. So whether that's through science or through personal experience, there's many ways that we gather truth. So that's always been my focus. And I also had experiences when I was young, like a lot of people do. So out of body experiences, for example, intuitive dreams, sometimes nothing, too drastic, but enough, verified experiences like that to feel like, okay, something's going on here. And I spoke to enough people that have also had those experiences. So I knew that, our minds can sort of transcend our brain and connect to information beyond our skulls, for example.
Mm-hmm.
So and had a sort of a difficult childhood that caused me to question a lot of things and simultaneously, be focused on reducing suffering as part of that. So I got very interested in things like extrasensory perceptions, out-of-body experiences, but kind of put that aside because I also was pursuing science because I thought this is our means of knowing the truth. So did biology and psychology degrees and did my PhD in neuroscience within a materialist framework. So this is the predominant model in science today, materialism, which is outdated by about 100 years at this point, and needs to be updated to what we call a post-materialist science. So in my standard education, I was in this materialist framework, meanwhile having all these experiences that within that framework can't exist, or, you're cuckoo. Of course you didn't leave your body last night, that.
Right.
So I kind of went back and forth within myself of like having these experiences and knowing, yeah, of course there's more to life than, our five senses, and consciousness probably, survives death, and these kinds of beliefs based on my experiences. And then all my education, which was like, no, that definitely can't exist. Consciousness comes from the activity of the brain, the neurochemical activity in the brain creates an experience of consciousness. And when the brain's no longer functioning, that's the end, and so on and so forth. So I had a brief time where I maybe believed that, maybe. But eventually I got into meditation and yoga and some more Eastern practices, I guess. And when that happened, I had such a deep experience of the shift that can occur, of the transcendence that can occur, the spiritual experiences that can occur through the practices of meditation and yoga, whereas before I was having spontaneous experience, maybe I'd dream and then, I'd have a psychic dream, or all of a sudden I'd be out of my body, or these kinds of things were not under my control. I wasn't having a practice. So once I started doing practices and experiencing these kinds of states of consciousness, these transcendent states where we're beyond our little self, and then I thought, okay, I need to bring this into what I'm doing academically. So I finished my PhD within a materialist sort of framework, and then pursued research in mindfulness and yoga and energy medicine and practices that, like you said, fall into this post-materialist program. So materialist science is saying everything is matter, including consciousness. Consciousness is coming from matter, emerging from the brain. It's doing its thing, and it's creating this experience of consciousness. Post-materialist science allows for the reverse to kind of be true, where consciousness is the fundamental nature of reality, and it is matter is emergent from consciousness. So consciousness first, then matter. So we're kind of turning things around, or at least being open to the fact that it could be that way too, based on what we know from some quantum physics experiments and mechanics, the way that our mental aspect plays in physical reality, and the way that consciousness can kind of direct matter in a way. And so we have a lot of lines of evidence that point to a post-materialist perspective. So we're calling, we being hundreds, maybe thousands at this point, of scientists, academics, physicians that are calling for a post-materialist paradigm shift in science, so that we can now embrace all of these experiences and practices. And I mean, we've done so much in research with mindfulness and meditation now. We know the benefits, and, starting to integrate some of that into medicine, psychology, psychiatry. So that's really a movement that's happening that maybe hasn't gained public attention yet, but it is growing. Like I see like this big snowball forming, and more people are now engaged in this kind of research. And even medicine's shifting. Even, we're having more and more integrative medicine. That means including some of these practices within the hospital system. I was just on a webinar about that, bringing Reiki energy medicine into the hospital system, and how great it is for cancer patients, for example. So as medicine starts to just allow some of these practices in, because they actually work and help people, we're kind of secretly opening to a post-materialist medicine without maybe the people realizing it. So that's, it's a movement happening that's going to hopefully increase our overall well-being by embracing who we really are, our extended self beyond the mind and body. So
Thank you.
you're welcome.
What would post-materialistic psychology and psychiatry look like?
Yeah, it would be a lot different, that's for sure. There's so much to unpack there. I mean, where to even start? So in psychiatry and psychology, when you have these kinds of experiences, if they cause you suffering, and if in a materialist paradigm, they might cause you suffering. So to get diagnosis or anything, there's always this, it impairs your life in some way, right? You know that. So,
Right.
but it is categorized as, schizotypal disorder, like this, part of maybe aspects of schizophrenia, or, it certainly would be classified as hallucinations or delusions a lot of the time, right? So
Right.
I think that's the paradigm that we're in psychiatry, but there certainly are people practicing or integrative psychology, for example, where they would refer them for these kinds of, spiritual therapies, for example. They would be open to it. I know some of them exist for sure. So that's that integrative medicine sort of weaving its way in, allowing for some of these practices to be integrated. But yeah, at this point, it would be, at the very least, well, it would be psychoactive medication, essentially, if you presented with having certain experiences that fell outside of the materialist paradigm. traditionally. Of course, if we look at history, it's like it can be really, really brutal what they would do in psychiatry, lobotomies and all kinds of things like that. But today, you could potentially find someone who is open to this, because I think a paradigm shift is coming. But a post-materialist psychiatry and psychology would be very different, where you would be open to the very idea that these experiences have some validity to them. So it really accepts the patient a lot more, rather than labeling them with something, or creating a lot of fear, that you
Right.
might be, quote, crazy. Of course, you wouldn't say that, psychotic or delusional, have hallucinations, these kinds of things that really probably prevent a lot of patients from being honest about what's going on with them, out of
Right.
fear of that as well. So how many patients are having these some extraordinary experiences and are not even discussing it, because
Right.
they don't want to go down that road. So being able to allow for that space to even discuss these kinds of experiences would be a great shift. And then from there, digging through, if there's, obviously there'd be suffering involved if you've gone to a psychologist or a psychiatrist, digging through that connection there and embracing tools to work with the different aspects of the self. So that would be like shamanic techniques, energy medicine, these kinds of things, bringing that into the psychiatry, because we see with things like Reiki, which, the idea of Reiki operates outside of the materialist paradigm completely. And especially when you're, distance Reiki is a whole other level. Because in materialism, the brain, the consciousness, the intention cannot leave your body, essentially. So to affect someone just with your mind at a distance, or your love and your thoughts and all of that, is just out of the question. But to bring that into psychiatry would be incredible.
Yeah.
And I think in psychology, and I think that is happening. And there are people doing that. I've met people that, I do Reiki in my practice. I give a little bit of Reiki sometimes. And so it's happening. It is
Yeah.
happening everywhere. And I think more and more people are going to have conversations like this to bring this out into the open. And it's really very exciting, actually, because now we're going to transform our understanding of ourselves at a collective level and enter this, this awakened state
Right.
of who we really are in our higher consciousness. And the cascade of benefits of that globally and, through all aspects of society is enormous. The way we treat the planet, animals, each other. And it is happening. And I don't want to just be like rose colored, yay, it's going to fix everything. But it really will change a lot of things, because it's like a fundamental shift in how we see reality in ourselves. So I think, we're on the way there. I don't know if it'll be during my lifetime, but I think a lot of us are aware that this kind of shift is happening, and it's across many different aspects
Yeah.
of the world, not just in science.
Yeah, I would agree with you, because I know at Pivots, that's one of the things that we're really embracing, because it really is about the entire human experience. And there's so many things that, we don't see that do create our human experience. And it's important to be able to look at that and be able to help heal those parts and accept those parts of the whole person. And
Mhm.
because we are a trauma center, there are, many things that we need to look at. And I would be curious, from your point of view, how do you see trauma making us more intuitive and enhancing our extrasensory perception?
Yeah, that's a good question. And a lot of people have experienced this, and I see it a lot in my Reiki practice, and just people I work with day to day, friends, people I meet.
Mm-hmm.
Very, very common for people who have extra sensitivities to have experienced trauma in their life. And most people have had some kind of trauma, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
but it seems to be sort of the more severe ends up,
Right.
I call it like broken open. I wrote an article about this, like broken open, that like these events happen and somehow we end up opened up
Yeah.
to perceiving more than
Mm-hmm.
we did before. And
Mm-hmm.
we can think of it at a very basic, we can think of it at a very basic materialist level, even where we're thinking something happens and we need to have a hypervigilance. There's
Mm-hmm.
the amygdala is involved in fear, memories, and conditioning. And so we're going to have this, maybe sometimes there's like an exaggerated startle, for example. That's an example of a behavior where maybe something's happened to us and now whenever someone knocks at the door really fast, or we're like so
Mm-hmm.
everything is very much amplified. So that's a very
Mm-hmm.
basic example of how like your senses and your reactivity is heightened based on something traumatic
Mm-hmm.
that may have happened, or some kind of fear or danger or something along those lines. And that's a survival mechanism.
Right.
It's like
Right.
it's like, okay, we need to adapt to our environment. So,
Mm-hmm.
oh, your environment is one where danger happens a lot, right?
Mm-hmm.
That it's a dangerous environment. So you better put your little feelers up more and tune in more, open up that filter in the brain. I don't know if they've done studies on this yet. I don't think they have, but there are, networks in the brain that filter what's
Mm-hmm.
coming in
Mm-hmm.
sensorily, and I do believe extrasensory as well.
Right.
So the information we're picking up gets filtered. And sometimes we don't notice things, like subliminal messaging, all kinds of stuff. There's so much that we're not tuning into and picking up. So that filtering gets altered. And in the case of a very basic like fear response, conditioning, exaggerated startle, that's one way. And maybe it's to sounds, right? So um, very small sounds will get a huge response from us. But this also happens with more information, like than just sensory input, like I said, extra sensory information as well. So at the emotional level, you're going to want to say someone hurt you, someone, okay, if you're in a home with an abusive parent and they're very chaotic and you never know what mood they're going to be in, and some of those times those moods are dangerous to you, like either shouting or verbal abuse. So you're going to want to be able to perceive very subtle variabilities in their emotion, and you're going to want to like super
Mm-hmm.
tune in. So when they're a little bit off, you just feel it fully, right? And then
Right.
you create the empath. So a lot of people that are empaths have experienced some kind of abuse, or usually I would say, because it's really directed toward tuning into the emotions of others so that you can be prepared for
And read the
something.
room. Right.
Read the room, right?
Right.
So those people also will be, yeah, less likely to be in a space where people are,
Right.
they'll be more, end up being a lot more introverted and things like that. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I mean, there's an alteration that occurs to help us to pick up more. And it can be a very basic survival level.
Right. Right.
But then we get this beautiful opportunity to turn those into gifts, because
That's
they are
right.
gifts.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So being able to, have an empathic way about you, you can be a really good healer when you can feel what the other people's, you can feel not only what they're feeling, but the unconscious
Mm-hmm.
emotions that need to come to. You got you just know the whole emotional scene because of
Mm-hmm.
what happened to open that up in you. And now you have this amazing gift to tap into that for somebody, to help them flush that out, process it,
Mm-hmm.
to connect with them, to know where they're at. It's can be very, very helpful for things like
Mm.
healing work and probably medicine and all kinds of helping professions.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then you
Absolutely.
have, mediumship that can come from that, which is tremendous. And
Mm-hmm.
to have to be able to offer that kind of service to somebody is one of the greatest gifts I think that you can have. So
Yeah. Yeah. And, with working in trauma, it definitely is, what we see, especially when we're helping a person through their healing journey. And for so long, they've seen all these heightened senses as something that is a disability. and then to be on the other side of their healing, and then to learn how to be able to balance it as a gift, and then to be able to, work through that is definitely, something that they can then be able to use to their benefit, and
Mhm.
other people. So,
Mhm.
I appreciate what you're saying there. I think that's wonderful. Um,
Mm.
what are other ways that people can connect with the ultimate self to improve intuition and well-being?
Mm. Um, well, I mean, gosh, we have so many tools, right? And you have to find what works for you. For some people, it's prayer daily, and
Mm-hmm.
I would use multiple practices. I can only speak to myself, but I can also speak to some of the literature and what seems to be really helpful for people. Um, I think meditation is fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
I think you also need a body practice just from what I've learned. So like yoga or even just consistent exercise. I found a lot in my Reiki practice that I call it like the homework that comes through, like what it's a lot about exercise and nature and grounding. And so of course we want these like this transcendent spiritual experience, but we actually need to be like a grounded antenna.
Mm-hmm.
Need to be connected to the earth, and our bodies. And I find so a lot of times it's like, oh, you need to do some resistance training. And so I think of that for myself too. Like, okay, I need to do that too. But it's a thing about like having this um, healthy channel, healthy temple as well. So I don't want to neglect the body. I think that's really important. So things like yoga, qigong, tai chi, anything that you bring the body into it as well is really helpful. So I think sometimes if we just meditate, we might be a little ungrounded and we might not be feeling that we're fully releasing what can be stored in the body. So trauma would be stored in the body and the
Mm-hmm.
tissues in that. And so a lot of things like yoga. There's other practices, somatic experiencing and things that I haven't personally done. I love yoga, so I was talking about yoga. Um, but yeah, even just exercise and nature so that we can sort of pull some of that stored energy out as well. So that's really, really important. I find energy medicine is so Reiki in particular is
Mm-hmm.
really, really powerful for connecting with that ultimate self, which I think was the question, like that,
Mm-hmm.
the one self, because in able to do Reiki well, you have to put the little self aside or, dissolve the little self into the big self. There's no longer, it's not really, there's no longer a you there. It's just the one, and you're exchanging that energy through that love and that connection. So by doing those practices, you're connecting with that ultimate self. And then like when I trained in Reiki, it was like 15 years ago, I didn't realize that it was going to increase my intuition. I don't know why. I just wasn't thinking about
Right.
it.
Mm-hmm.
And then all of a sudden, get all this information as I started practicing. I was like, oh, whoa, whoa. And some of it's very symbolic, animal spirits. And sometimes it's deceased loved ones that come in and, you know, I never know what's going to come, which is a lot of fun. But it's also really helpful for people to get that extra sensory information where it's like, it's really validating and transformative for them. So Reiki is a really good practice for, I think, connecting in that way and getting, I never get like really terrible, terrible thing. It's always like a high vibration of kind of information that comes through. It's never, I'm never scared or like, whoa, it's
Mm-hmm.
just the way it comes is very gentle and loving as so. Yeah, there's tons of things people do, fasting,
Mm-hmm.
static static dance, there's other things, so many practices. And I think it's important to find what works for you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Um, how important is spirituality when coping with grief and loss?
Mm. I I mean, gosh, it can't be overstated, I would say,
Yeah.
because although I have held potentially atheistic views at some teenage stage, I don't even know. Like I was probably fake, but The idea that, your loved one passes and then you'll never be able to communicate or love them again is just like, wow, what a tragic view.
Mm-hmm.
So really knowing through experience and data, I think is so important. I don't know. I'm personal
You love to
experience.
research.
Yeah, I love
Yeah,
it. So if we can actually get the data on it, then it's great. So
right.
some people need that more than some people will only need that, and some people will only need a personal experience. But knowing through one of those means,
Mm-hmm.
um, and knowing more than belief, like knowing. So if we can get to the point of like knowing that our loved ones are
Mm-hmm.
still with us, there's not
Mm-hmm.
even any space, like they're right here. We're all like right here
That's right.
together.
That's right.
um, Knowing that, really, really knowing that, like at a societal level, would be so incredible and amazing and relieve so much suffering. I think, losing someone close to you is one of the worst things that you can experience as a person.
Yeah.
And I mean, and even knowing that, extending beyond just the grief aspect,
Mm-hmm.
but our whole life and our whole life experience, if we knew for sure that we were eternal, beyond belief, I mean, like we know.
Mm-hmm.
uh, Gosh, how would the world change then?
Yeah.
I mean,
In such amazing ways it would change.
mhm.
Yeah.
In a way that's a unifying way. I don't mean in a religious way because we've known that, but
Mm-hmm.
then we end up othering people and hurting people other that don't have that belief or whatever. I don't mean that. I don't mean some dogmatic
Right.
kind of shift like that, the truth, which is that we're all part of this one
Yeah.
consciousness.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, so I
Yeah.
I think we're going to get there. I really, really do. So the suffering that comes with grief would be reduced. I mean, they've done some studies looking at grief and then having mediumship readings
Mm-hmm.
with highly skilled mediums and
Mm-hmm.
then measuring their grief following. And it definitely helps with the
Mm-hmm.
process and the pain. And you essentially get to talk to them for a little bit through if they're a good medium, right? So very, very healing, very helpful.
Yeah.
And then if we can teach that for, you know, everyone, then you don't need a medium. That would be even better.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit about one of the books that you have helped co-author, Expanding Science?
Yeah, sure. Expanding Science, I co-authored with Mario Beauregard, Gary Schwartz, and Marjorie Willicott. It's published through the Academic Association for Postmaterial Science, AAPS. And it's an anthology. So it's a collection of different chapters by different authors that all are experts in various fields. And the whole purpose of Expanding Science is to declare this need to shift to a post-materialist science. So we have different lines of evidence that suggest that consciousness may exist outside the brain. So that's kind of what it all comes down to is like, are we existing outside the brain? Do we need matter to exist? Do we exist before incarnation? These kinds of questions in the case of past lives. So there's different lines of evidence presented in a scientifically rigorous way. So we're looking at, like I said, past children who remember past lives that have
Mm-hmm.
been
Mm-hmm.
validated cases. So there's been over 1,000 well-validated cases of children that recall past lives in sufficient detail to verify that life existed.
Right. Right.
Yeah, those cases are very, very interesting. Um, Chapter on near-death experiences, another line of evidence when people have been clinically dead, for example. No more brain activity. Maybe there's some residual brain activity, but not the amount that we would expect to have this fully vivid experience that these near-death experiencers have, where very often it's feels more real than reality. It's
Right.
expansive. There's, everything's more vivid. So you would expect even greater greater involvement of the brain if we're having such a multi-sensory, expansive experience, right? But the brain is, basically flatlined. So those kinds of lines of evidence, those started happening more and more and more once we had resuscitation equipment in hospitals. All of a sudden, people were having them more because they were coming back from death. Yeah. Mediumship's another line of evidence where you're communicating with a mind
Right.
that doesn't have a brain anymore, right?
Right.
So how does that happen? So we require a post-materialist perspective to accept that there's a reality that you can still communicate with someone who has passed. So there's lines of evidence like that. There's chapters on just the shift in general. Mine is kind of like that, like about the societal shift of post-materialism. And so I think it's a really great collection of the full perspective of this, the need for this shift. So yeah.
That's great. Well, we are really, really lucky to have you on our team, Natalie.
Oh,
And
thanks, Lynn.
I really appreciate your time today. And if there are any closing words that you have for our audience, I'd love for you to share that.
Yeah, I say this all the time to just, do the practices because I think I just tell myself that too. Maybe because all day I'm researching and collecting knowledge. And you can know these things, right? But it's really important to do the practices, do your meditation and do your nature walk and to keep that connection live. So I always just recommend just do the practices and also try to keep it simple and not
Mm,
overcomplicate these kinds of things because it is just about connecting with your natural self, who you really are, the true self, the ultimate self. So we're not really adding anything so much as just kind of taking things away, just so less is more in the case, and
mm.
to just spend time just being rather than doing. And as I say this, I'm saying it right to myself. Oh, yes.
I love that. I love that. Yeah, we need to be able to tell ourselves the same thing and be our own practitioner at the same time as we're doing that for others. So thank you so much, Natalie, for being here today and sharing what you have with our
Oh,
audience.
thank you,
Um,
Lynn.
definitely just great information that you shared.
Oh,
So
thank you.
thank you. And thank you everyone for being here today for Pivots Pulse podcast. And join us next time later in December as we share again at Pivots Pulse podcast.